Obi-Wan Kenobi was a former Padawan of the Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn. Kenobi later became a legendary Jedi Knight who rose to prominence after his defeat of Sith apprentice Darth Maul during the Naboo Crisis in 32 BBY. Following Jinn's death, Kenobi took charge of Anakin Skywalker's training and went on to serve with distinction during the galactic conflict known as the Clone Wars, eventually being named to the Jedi Council. After Anakin Skywalker's defection to the Sith, Kenobi tracked down his former apprentice to Mustafar, where he challenged and managed to gravely injure the recently anointed Darth Vader before watching over the birth of Vader's children, Luke and Leia. Kenobi lived out the rest of his days on Tatooine, waiting for the right moment to begin the younger Skywalker's training. During a mission meant to release the captured Princess Leia and deliver the stolen Death Star plans to the desperate Rebel Alliance, Kenobi faced his erstwhile apprentice for one final time before sacrificing himself and becoming one with the Force. He would go on to continue guiding Luke Skywalker in the ways of the Force before convincing the ancient Master Yoda to complete the young man's Jedi training. Obi-Wan Kenobi earned his place as one of the greatest Jedi in the Order's history. Mace Windu was an eminent Jedi Master who served as a senior member of the Jedi Council in the waning days of the Republic. Though initially skeptical that the Order of the Sith Lords had returned, Windu was forced to acknowledge the truth after the death of Qui-Gon Jinn at the hands of Darth Maul. A famed diplomat and revered swordsman, Windu served as one of the most respected and powerful Jedi generals of the Clone Wars, leading his forces to victory on numerous occasions. Though a staunch advocate for the principles embodied by the Republic, Windu held little regard for politicians or clones and grew increasingly mistrustful, sensing the unfurling of a plot to destroy the Jedi. Windu, while not a ruthless man, was determined to safeguard his civilization and his order and neutralize the threat of the Sith and separatist movements at almost any cost, including the trust of the Senate and the office of the Chancellor. These convictions caused his relationships with various other prominent council members to be strained at times, though he was level-headed and remained a true servant of the light. When Darth Sidious revealed himself to Anakin Skywalker, the conflicted knight reported what he had learned to Master Windu, who quickly resolved to take the Chancellor into custody and wrest control of the Republic back from the Sith. Though his fellow Jedi were cut down in seconds, Windu managed to defeat Sidious after a difficult final battle before the conflicted young Skywalker intervened. Manipulating the scene to his advantage by preying on Anakin's deepest fear and feigning weakness, Sidious finally succeeded in drawing Anakin to the dark side. Skywalker severed Windu's sword arm as the latter prepared to deal a death blow to the Sith Lord. Darth Sidious then unleashed his true power upon the wounded Jedi Master, ending his life and commencing the Great Jedi Purge. As a result of Mace Windu's ostensible assassination attempt, and after centuries of covert planning and effort, the galaxy fell wholly under the sway of the Sith Lords when Emperor Palpatine came to power. But the rise of the Empire and destruction of the Jedi was not the product of a sole Sith Lord's effort. Palpatine's success culminated the execution of the Grand Plan, as his forebears had referred to it, which began a millennium earlier with the ascension of the Dark Lord, Darth Bane. Once a destitute miner born on the barren world of Apoltros, Darth Bane became the fabled Sithari, the prophesied perfect being destined to return the Sith Order to its rightful state. Bane distanced himself from his contemporaries who had become enthralled by the enigmatic and crafty Lord Khan. Though their leader was strong in the Force, ambitious and charismatic, the Brotherhood of Darkness was set on the path of ruin from the beginning, however, and recognizing this, Bane turned away from the common throng and adopted the abandoned mantle of Darth, a signal to the rest that he had declared himself the strongest and worthiest of the Sith Lords. After he had learned all he could from his hated instructors, Bane journeyed to the long-forgotten unknown world, the seat of power for the Rakatan Infinite Empire that had spanned the galaxy in the dim past. Inside the Temple of the Ancients, he recovered the holocron of Sith Lord Darth Revan, later the redeemed Jedi Master who defeated Darth Malak on the Starforge millennia earlier. Taking what valuable knowledge he could from the former Sith Lord, and using a devastating ritual called the Thought Bomb, Bane instigated a series of events that ended with the decimation of Jedi General Hoth's Army of Light and the total destruction of the Brotherhood of Darkness on Ruusan. As a result of the successful execution of his plan, Darth Bane became the galaxy's sole surviving Dark Lord of the Sith. As he raced away from the blast radius of the thought bomb, Bane happened upon a young girl who showed a pronounced Force sensitivity, the rare gift of Sith sorcery, and an affinity for the dark side. Dubbing her Darth Zana, he took her as his apprentice, and over the next 2 decades he would groom her to take the mantle of a true Sith Master and carry on his legacy. 2 there should be, no more, no less, one to embody the power, the other to crave it. 1 master and 1 apprentice, the rule of 2. After a difficult final battle, Zana emerged battered but victorious, and along with her new apprentice Darth Cognis, immediately set about the business of carrying out the Sith imperative, the covert ascendant of the Sith, the destruction of the Jedi, and the perpetuation of the rule of 2. You know the drill, it's time to compare and contrast the various skills of the characters, starting with their lightsaber techniques. In his prime, Obi-Wan Kenobi was considered by Mace Windu to be the greatest Soresu master of the era. Soresu, the third form of lightsaber combat, was first developed in response to the increase in availability of blaster technology. Later on, the form became a more refined expression of non-aggressive Jedi philosophy designed around defense. The style is characterized by tight, efficient movements that expose minimal target areas. Thus, as the consummate master of Form 3, Obi-Wan Kenobi is an expert with blast deflection and nearly invincible while engaging in a lightsaber duel. To summarize, Kenobi's fighting style is characterized by a modest, elegant simplicity that few have ever been able to outmaneuver. In keeping with the connotations long adhered to the common throng of venerable Form 3 masters, Kenobi, while not always able to surmount his adversary, was himself almost impossible to defeat due to his impeccable defensive capabilities. While it is true that Kenobi himself has stated that Form 3 is the only style in which he believes himself to be truly proficient, I think that belief can be relegated to something more in the way of self-effacement. In his youth he studied Ataru, the preferred form of his master, Qui-Gon Jinn. A seasoned master of the form, he may never have elevated his practice of Ataru to its purest expression in quite so destructive a fashion as Yoda, but he was skilled enough with it to match the prodigious young duelist Darth Maul for a relatively lengthy amount of time, considering the pace with which lightsaber duels are normally fought. This also points to a high degree of stamina, as Form 4 is characterized as a demanding and exhaustive practice. On a few occasions, Kenobi has also demonstrated the ability to wield dual sabers, suggesting a competence with the Jar-Kaya variant, which in turn implies an understanding of Naman. Recently, we have been presented with source material which points to an adept level of training with dual blades, if not an actual expertise, in which Kenobi manages to hold his own against Darth Maul and Savage Opress. During his initial confrontation with Dooku on board Invisible Hand, Kenobi also utilized Shi-Cho, which is the first and most basic form of lightsaber combat. But in the right hands, it can be a more than effective tool. So basically, you'd be hard-pressed to find a style that Kenobi lacks at least a rudimentary understanding of how to either use or counter. Although he was defeated with clear ease during his first bout with Dooku, Kenobi's dueling-centric skills were fostered during the war, and by their last battle, Kenobi's practice of Soresu allowed him to defend capably against the Sith Lord, at least while the other was likewise embroiled in a heated duel against Anakin Skywalker. During this fight, Dooku had to use his Force powers to subdue the Jedi Master, as his own application of Makashi simply was no longer sufficient to break through Kenobi's defense, at least not nearly as efficiently as Dooku had hoped, and that is saying something. His defenses even held against Anakin on Mustafar, although it should be noted that he was obviously pushed to his limit during this fight, and Anakin's own misjudgment and arrogance factored into his defeat here as much or more than Obi-Wan's own skill. On various occasions, he has demonstrated a knack for unarmed combat, the example in which he is depicted holding his own against a fully equipped Jango Fett being only one of many. Although an actual confrontation was always Kenobi's last resort where applicable, when he was forced to strike he would do so expertly. As a general of the Clone Wars, Kenobi, along with his then commander, former Padawan, and great friend Anakin Skywalker, enjoyed a great number of military victories due in no small part to Kenobi's keen tactical mind, patience, and application of Jedi philosophy. Darth Zana was similarly a master of the third form of lightsaber combat. but that's where the similarities between her and Kenobi end. Equipped with a double-bladed lightsaber with slightly shorter blades than were standard, meant to suit her purely defensive stance, Zannah has been described as being capable of raising an impenetrable wall of defense. However, she has been disarmed by her master, though not without great effort on his part. Zannah's prowess with Soresu also allowed her to toy with the skillful Ataru stylist Setharth, a dark Jedi who reluctantly became one of Zannah's prospective Sith apprentices. A key weakness in Zannah's technique, however, is her complete inability to properly use her environment to her advantage, or even prevent it from being used by her opponent to her disadvantage. Conversely, these weaknesses of Zannah are actually strengths of Kenobi's. Frequently, Zannah is tripped up by rugged terrain impeding her footwork, or otherwise allowing herself to be boxed into tight corners or forced up against a wall. Even when she attacked an unarmed Darth Bane in an enclosed location, she proved incapable of quickly ending the contest despite the fact that she had both the benefit of armament and a limited dueling ground where Bane had nothing but his agility and force powers to rely on. Aside from acting as a possible interlude between displays of force power, applications of Soresu versus Soresu would be something of a non-entity. Given that, we now consider the other forms at their disposal. Darth Zannah has never displayed mastery of any other form, and was shown on numerous occasions to be completely incapable of mounting a suitable offense under any circumstance. It really is just that simple. This is not to say that she is unable to switch to aggressive sequences in order to finish off her opponents. She can and does, as evidenced by the Battle of Tython. But she has never succeeded in dominating a battle against a masterful opponent, whether putting them on the defensive or manipulating them into making a mistake of their own. For all intents and purposes, all Zannah really has on her side is a shield and patience. While Kenobi employed a purposely flawed demonstration of Shicho against Dooku during their final duel in order to lull the Sith into a false sense of security, it is not a form that's on his usual roster, and while it may be in his arsenal, it is not the worthiest choice from his bag of tricks and is unlikely to come into play. The most likely conclusion is that Kenobi would resort to using either Ataru or Naman against Zannah while she's forced to ride out the assault. Now, of course, Darth Zannah has weathered some pretty severe storms in her time, having survived her master's training and tested her skills against the up-and-coming Jedi weapons master Saro Zaj and the talented, if unambitious, Dark Jedi Setharth. But it should be noted that Saro would have most likely defeated her if he hadn't been distracted by the disruption of his comrade's battle meditation, leaving him open to one of Zannah's assaults. To his credit, Setharth did indeed tire himself out during his fight with Zannah, but he also had no real idea who Zannah was or what she was truly capable of, having deemed her a simple intruder rather than a Sith master. Apart from anything else, neither of these duelists was as strong in the Force as Kenobi. Also, Kenobi can admit when he's out of his depth, and would not underestimate Zannah, nor would he expend his energies so fruitlessly. Though she's good at what she does, in truth, Zannah's technique is tailored for one thing and one thing only. It serves to defend her while expending a minimal amount of energy, as she takes the time she needs to unleash her chaotic Sith sorcery. Against the rank and file, Zannah is absolutely a deadly warrior to behold. But if she is facing a talented, trained Force sensitive capable of taking the offensive, then essentially all she can do with her lightsaber is buy herself some time. Obi-Wan, on the other hand, is a talented lightsaber duelist with several forms under his belt, and his speed, ingenuity, physical strength, and dexterity served him well throughout the war and contributed to his surviving the duel on Mustafar against the exponentially more overwhelming threat imposed by Anakin, to whom Darth Zannah simply does not compare as a lightsaber duelist. Kenobi could comfortably take the offensive approach against a duelist as comparatively limited as Zannah. He could undoubtedly keep her under the gun for an extensive period of time, forcing her to rely on her Force talents. And Kenobi has versatility on his side and a wide array of options. Zannah simply does not. And now we address the Jedi Master Mace Windu. Simply put, Windu is a powerhouse. Windu's signature fighting style was a variation on the seventh form of his own creation, the style known as Vapad. Windu hands himself over to the Force and transforms his enjoyment of a good fight into a more positive expression of Jedi philosophy. He essentially feeds on the power of darkness without manipulating it or being guided by it. In order to accomplish this, he channels the rage of his dark opponent. This is how he's able to not simply deflect or absorb Sith lightning, but also redirect it, albeit not as readily as someone like Master Yoda could. It works the same way when he engages in combat whether armed with a lightsaber or not, as evidenced by the novel Shatterpoint. Given the aggressive nature of the art Windu favors, and the fact that masters of Vaapad have to have mastered previous forms of lightsaber combat, there can be no doubt that Mace is highly skilled, varied, and overwhelming. The novel Shatterpoint sheds a great deal of light on Mace's force abilities and physical attributes. Though he ultimately lost his unarmed bout with the hulking force wielder Kar Vastor on their homeworld of Harun Kal, Mace managed to hold out for a lengthy period of time due to his strength in the Force and nearly 50 years of combat training. During the fight, he mustered his strength at one point and delivered a punch that sent Vastor reeling back head over heels, landing on the back of his neck. Throughout various sources, whether video games, novels, or cartoons, he has been depicted using the Force to telekinetically manipulate his lightsaber at times, whether in the midst of hand-to-hand combat or through intense focus. His agility, while perhaps not too far above the standard for trained lightsaber duelists of the master level, was considerable. Likewise, his speed should also be taken into account. Keeping in mind that Palpatine had just used deception to dispatch the telepathic Saesee Tiin and struck down Zabrak Jedi Master Agen Kolar before the latter even knew what happened, Mace was able to match the Dark Lord's speed. During his fight with the Chancellor, Mace is described along with Palpatine as moving so fast as to appear to be fading in and out of existence from the point of view of a distraught Anakin Skywalker. Similarly, he landed 6 blows against the powerful raw force-sensitive Kar Vastor, faster than the latter could see. In the novel Yoda Dark Rendezvous, it was acknowledged that other than Yoda, Mace was believed to be the only other Jedi who may be capable of matching Count Dooku on even ground, at least at that point in time. Powerful and direct, whether in battle or debate, elaborate and dynamic in technique, Mace was as deadly as they come, and unlike Kenobi, had no qualms about cutting loose once a situation escalated to a certain point. Darth Bane was a gifted master of the lightsaber and in my opinion remains one of the greatest duelists of all time. He had always possessed a fantastic fighting spirit, fostered by his upbringing on the harsh world of Apatros, being the victim of his own abusive father. Prior to joining the Brotherhood of Darkness, Bane served as a gifted field commander in the Gloomwalker division of the Sith military. Given his military training and his rough childhood, Bane was a tough brawler and a crafty, strong, unarmed opponent. Upon gaining admittance to the Sith Academy on Korriban, after coming to the attention of Lord Kopej, Bane's lightsaber training began. From his mid to late 20s to his mid to late 30s, Bane was encased in a suit of Orbalisk armor, an organic suit composed of many small symbiotic parasites. He was invulnerable when encased in this unique suit, and he could simply take the lightsaber blows from his opponents and power through them with pure offense. Additionally, his strength in the Force was bolstered by his symbiotic relationship to the parasites. The disadvantage of the suit was that he was often given to a loss of control because of his enhanced temper. This inability to control himself, along with a few other factors, eventually led Bane opting to find a way to rid his body of the Orbalisk infestation, despite the benefits it imparted, as the cost was just too high. As such, the pros and cons imparted by the armor do not apply to this video, as we're dealing with Bane after he lost the armor. Accordingly, we are not dealing with the Darth Bane who proceeded with reckless abandon, but with the calculating Dark Lord, who, while empowered by his rage through the dark side of the Force, also operated using precision, strength, and refinement despite his ostensibly brutal approach. Due to his physical size and strength, Bane chose to specialize in the 5th form of lightsaber combat. Bane favored the Gemso variant. Trained in the art by the Twi'lek Blade Master Kasim in the ancient Sith Academy on Korriban, Bane suffered several defeats, some of them near fatal and all embarrassing. After a particularly brutal defeat from the Zabrak apprentice Sirak, Bane was left bloodied and battered within an inch of his life. With the aid of the deceptive and ambitious Githany, Bane regained his fighting spirit and resolved to have his revenge. A new hunger rekindled within him. Bane's studies accelerated, and within the span of perhaps a year at most, He had mastered Gemsto to the point that he was capable of effortlessly crushing Serac, and held his own against his former teacher Kasim during their final duel at the Rakatan Temple after Bane had left the Brotherhood. Bane could exploit his physique to carry out devastating power attacks, and with the advent of his own intricately memorized and innovated sequences and drills, used in conjunction with the curved hilt lightsaber, Bane made for an incredibly imposing juggernaut on the battlefield. Though Gemsto was undoubtedly Bane's favorite form, he was also well versed with Soresu, having mastered it to the point where he could fend off torrents of rain during a downpour as a training exercise, and of course train his apprentice with Form 3 as well. Though not actually named in the text of the final novel, the description of Bane's technique at the end of Dynasty of Evil suggests that he was also skilled with Juyo. While Gemsto has been characterized by the weakness of limited mobility it grants its practitioners, at least in comparison to the other forms, a consummate master of the form can transcend this limitation. Bane is noted for both his speed and agility, able to match his slight, wiry female apprentice Zana in each of their duels. If you want a visual source with which to imagine Bane's exploits, then I would consider the closest possible comparison to be the example set forth by Darth Malgus in the Old Republic trailers. Due to an error in the text of Darth Bane Path of Destruction, some of you may be thinking that Serac, Bane's one-time rival, knew Vapad, so Mace doesn't really have anything new to throw at Bane. But you'd be mistaken. Vapad was not developed until almost a millennium after Bane's death, Mace of course being the style's creator. The author of Darth Bane Path of Destruction was mistaken about this, and meant to define Serac's chosen style as Juyo, not Vapad. While it may be true that Bane's familiarity with employing and also defending against Juyo may factor into his ability to combat Mace Windu, it does nothing to truly negate Mace's knowledge, ability to absorb and redirect Dark Force powers, or the unique aspects of Mace's style, whether we're talking about the physical technique or application of the Vapad state of mind, as Mace puts it. Remember, Vapad is, in Mace's mind, the completed seventh form. He may have taken some cues from Juyo, but it's not the same thing, nor the complete foundation of Mace's favored style. Assisted by Sora Bulk, Mace developed Vapad. The style has unique and distinctive maneuvers alien to Juyo, evidenced by Mace's ability to identify the style even when it is being unknowingly used against him. This contest is interesting because unlike Kenobi vs Zana, Bane vs Windu does not have as clearly defined a more viable martial artist. Both are extremely capable unarmed fighters, and both understand how to utilize incredibly powerful forms without expending all of their energy too quickly. Mace's Shatterpoint ability makes him highly intuitive and capable of exploiting a weakness with precision and blinding speed the moment one is presented. Likewise, Bane understands how to use psychology and his environment to his advantage. Perhaps the greatest evidence of this was when Zana cornered her unarmed master within the stone prison on the world Doan. Recognizing that he could not defeat Zana without a lightsaber, Bane subtly brought attention to the fact that he was unarmed in a manner that suggested this was information he did not want to make Zana privy to. Thus baited, Zana foolishly chose to instigate an offensive approach focusing on Bane with her lightsaber, not at all her typical MO, as Bane well knew. As a result of her inexperience with the offensive approach and her own fighting style, Zana was unable to defeat him quickly, and he was able to buy himself enough time by warding her off with only his force abilities for a fairly extensive period of time to make his escape. Tactically, Mace is both smarter and more experienced than Zana, and wouldn't allow himself to be baited in such a way. In any case, his bases are better covered than hers, as he can defend as capably as he can destroy. Likewise, Bane is no fool. He would likely be able to recognize what Mace is doing, essentially feeding off the power of the dark side channeled by his dark opponent. And, unencumbered by his rage-fueling Orbalisk armor, Darth Bane would be capable of keeping a cooler head. However, doing so would decrease Mace's own amplification, but it would also prevent Bane from bringing his full might to bear, which would quite obviously pose a very risky proposition to the Dark Lord of the Sith, to whom the dark side of the Force is everything. Physically, Bane is taller, stronger, more imposing, but Mace has held his own against the even more massive Kar Vastor, and has held his ground during overwhelmingly offensive assaults from an array of highly talented duelists. Against most other opponents, even those of a similar level of mastery and power in the Force, Bane's practice of complementary forms such as the defensive Soresu and aggressive Gemso would make for a winning combination, especially when coupled with the infamously lethal Juyo. But adopting a purely defensive tactic against somebody as forward and skilled as Mace wouldn't do anything for Bane but buy time, and not much of it. A single mistake on his part would spell disaster, so he would need to move quickly and not waste a great deal of time. This is because Soresu would essentially only allow Bane to deal with Mace's onslaught, but not return it. The only way Bane could hope to consistently repel Windu would be to regress to using Form 5, as the energy it requires does enter into the aggressive and dominating side of things, which Bane would need, and it's also not as dangerous to use as Juyo because the ferocity that form demands would only fan Mace's fire due to the nature of Vaapad. On a technical level, I would have to consider Windu to be the more skilled swordsman in the end, however he's not vastly superior. Windu's years of experience have given him a great deal of stamina and practical skill, and although I do indeed consider him one of the greatest duelists of all time, he is not invincible, and Vaapad can only compensate for so much. Fortunately for him though, Darth Bane is the kind of Sith Lord that the style was designed to combat. In my view, only Darksiders who are capable of keeping a cool head in the heat of combat, or at least maintaining control of their berserker instincts, are capable of outmatching Mace on even ground, so long as the two are comparable in terms of skill and strength in the Force. It is the reason why Dooku, who I do not consider to be stronger than Bane, has a better chance of outsparring Mace Windu than Bane does. It's not that he's more powerful than Darth Bane, it's that he values elegance, cold, righteous indignation, above bloodlust and blind fury. He values a posturing sort of pride in place of anger, and meticulous planning and careful, stinging, emotional manipulation, more so than a raw connection to the dark side in order to accomplish his ends. When ranked next to most other Sith Lords, Dooku is somewhat unique in this fashion. Under any circumstance, of course, Darth Bane is powerful, but like most other Sith Lords, he cannot push himself to his absolute limits without giving in to the dark side. Against most opponents, this wouldn't matter because he isn't a lumbering savage fueled by bloodlust anymore. But against Master Windu, if Bane empowers himself through the dark side, he would also bolster his already imposing opponent. Because of the fact that Vaapad, when properly mastered, essentially allows a Jedi to match a dark opponent of greater strength in the Force, against Mace Windu's consummate use of the form, the best Bane could realistically hope for would be an impasse. But this would be broken once Mace utilized the Shatterpoint to either manipulate his environment to his advantage or exploit a rare fatal flaw in Bane's technique. Though it wouldn't be easy due to Bane's durability and masterful skill, Mace is the most likely to defeat his opponent in a contest of swordsmanship. And now for a brief rundown of their physical attributes. Obi-Wan Kenobi is in his late 30s, in excellent health, and his speed, reflexes, endurance, and stamina are all highly impressive. There may not be many noteworthy advantages inherent to Kenobi's physique, but there are no disadvantages either. He has also demonstrated a knack for sustaining great pain, both physical and emotional for that matter, and doggedly taking to the battlefield as though unaffected. Kenobi is tenacity personified. Darth Zana is an athletically built human woman of average height in her early to mid-30s. Aside from that, much the same can be said of her as Kenobi, the key differences between the two being her lesser physical strength and durability. She's tough and wily, but not as good at taking physical punishment as any of the other characters involved. Mace is similar to Kenobi, however as he is some 15 years older, his physical attributes are perhaps not quite as acute as they once were. However, his capacity for dealing with pain and injury is still very great, as we can see from his duels with Vaster and his former apprentice Deepa Billaba on Harun Kal. An example being when he continued to fight immediately after having sustained a stabbing wound to the abdomen from his former Padawan, whom he had presumed dead. Obviously, he is no pushover and he can remain in the game for extensive periods of time and endure an absolutely savage beating, though few confrontations with this Jedi Master last very long at all. Darth Bane is in his mid to late 40s, stands exactly 2 meters tall, and carries a muscular build from his years mining on Apotros. After so much physical strain and his years spent immersed in the dark side of the Force, his body is beginning to weaken slightly. He may not be in his prime, but he's far from decrepit. His tolerance for pain is absolutely incredible. This is somebody who has been repeatedly broken. He was emotionally and physically abused by his father in his youth, thrashed in the dueling ring on Korriban by his rivals, the victim of his own intense Force lightning due to a Jedi Master's force field on Tython, and of the toxins released by his parasitic armor thereafter. Even when he was disarmed, figuratively and literally, by Zana's last-ditch efforts with the Force and caught in the thrall of the pain after that horrific experience, Bane was able to summon the power and presence of mind to subdue his apprentice, disarm her, and attempt the ritual of essence transfer. This guy is not going to be beaten into submission by anybody. He'll just keep getting back up. It's a death blow or nothing. It is true that Bane suffered a spasm of nerves in his right arm during his final years. However, this is never factored into one of his duels, and it seems to be a minor nuisance that he can quell by digging his fingers into his palm. It seems to be nothing more than frustration, simply stemming from the begrudged admittance that his body is in fact weakening, rather than irritation caused by pain. In a statistical sense, the Jedi get the edge as a team, though they still have their work cut out for them when it comes to actually taking the Sith Lords down. Bane is stronger and tougher than Windu, while both Jedi are as nimble and fast as Zana, and more durable than her as well. But Zana is not weak, and even when she is outclassed, she gives her best effort until the end, never going to pieces when under strain. To add to that, both sets of characters work well as a team. As individuals, the Jedi get the advantage, but as teams, the factors generally balance out. Now we address their Force abilities. Obi-Wan Kenobi was one of the greatest Jedi Masters of his day, carrying an incredible knowledge of and sensitivity to the living Force, and he proved himself capable of applying many abilities from a wide array of disciplines and focuses. His mental and physical fortitude in particular are noteworthy, as he can take a lot of punishment, weathering torture sessions, days on end without proper nourishment or sleep, and he can endure a lot of pain in the midst of combat. While these traits may not be unusual for Force sensitives in and of themselves, Kenobi is remarkable even amongst his fellow Jedi for the ease with which he maintains his composure under such constraints, a reflection of his Jedi training and dedication to his studies of the Force. His telekinetic attacks were potentially devastating. Though not often employed, he has used the saber throw ability to great effect. His Force push rivaled that of even Anakin Skywalker's after the latter's fall to the dark side, even considering Anakin's mental state, which no doubt took a toll on his performance throughout this engagement. This is still an impressive feat of Kenobi's. On a more advanced level, his mental and telepathic abilities were also considerable. He was a master of telepathic manipulation, as demonstrated on numerous occasions. Known amongst his comrades for his disdain for mechanical vehicles, Kenobi preferred living mounts whenever and wherever possible, due to the connection between animal and rider, a bond he never hesitated to strengthen through the Force. At times, he has also demonstrated mastery over the Beast Trick ability as well. Kenobi has also been depicted at various times using the Force to deflect projectiles, fire, and even blaster bolts, though Force lightning is apparently beyond his ability to absorb or deflect without the usage of a lightsaber. Of worthy note, he is perhaps most famous for his ability to transcend the living plane as a Force spirit after his physical death, a state he gained awareness of after studying from Masters Qui-Gon Jinn and Yoda. Darth Zana possessed a strong connection to the Force and a rare affinity for Sith sorcery. Zana was able to use her abilities instinctively as a youth and without even genuine intent at times, oftentimes only unleashing the true might of her abilities when she was under great strain. An example being when her animalistic friend was killed by a pair of unwitting Jedi. A grief-stricken Zana called on the Force and snapped their necks. Her raw telekinetic attacks could also cause more pronounced destruction, such as when she blasted apart her cousin's hand in order to stop him from challenging her new master, in effect saving his life, despite leaving him with a bloody stump. However, she has never displayed a conscious use of such overtly destructive telekinetic abilities in battle against other beings strong in the Force. She has, however, proven herself capable of delivering Force blasts with more than sufficient force to kill, though these can be deflected with a properly raised Force shield. Ironically for a Sith who focuses more on mastery of the Force than blade work, Darth Zana has never been depicted summoning Force lightning, nor absorbing or deflecting it from her master without the aid of her lightsaber. Zana's skills with deception and subtle misdirection were facilitated by her powers of concealment and stealth, which were highly advanced. Remnants of her concealment spell at the healer Caleb's hut on Umbria endured and held a presence in the Force for a decade after she'd cast it. Perhaps her greatest achievement in this field was her successful infiltration of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, during which she cloaked herself in an aura of light side energy, blinding the Jedi she encountered to her true nature. When in the heat of combat, Darth Zana's most often used powers were those that attacked the mind of her victims, plaguing them with visions of their greatest fears until they were either driven wholly insane or rendered prone to a strike from her blade. Though those of sufficient willpower, such as her master, Darth Bane, were able to ward off this attack when given enough time to muster a defense. Zana's most destructive ability was the trump card she used to finally defeat her master on Umbria during their final duel. Calling upon the latent dark energies from beneath the very ground, trapped within the planet like those of Lake Nath, Zana conjured tendrils of pure, dark side energy, taking the form of a flesh and bone disintegrating mist. The use of this power required her to gather her strength, which took some time, and it was highly labor-intensive, requiring all of Zana's focus and left her prone to attack while in use. It also remains unclear whether she is capable of drawing these tendrils forth on her own, or if she requires an exceptionally potent source of external dark side energy, such as Lake Nath or the world of Umbria itself, bodies that are saturated with dark side energy. It is my personal belief that she can only accomplish this under certain circumstances, as she did not use the ability the first time she attacked Bane, when he was weaponless and cornered in a much smaller, more confined location, on decidedly more neutral ground. Quite a different arena than a nexus of dark side energy such as Umbria. This contest is interesting to me because it's similar to one outlined by Jen Sarai's analysis of Obi-Wan Kenobi versus Voto Siask-Bas. Here we have a Jedi Master whose use and even knowledge of the Force is comparatively mundane and far more conventional than his opponents. However, the manner in which he applies his limited scope is both crafty and more subtle than his competition. My favorite example would have to be this. When Kenobi found himself caught between a rock and a hard place during the Mustafar duel, he used the Force to spasm the circuitry in Anakin's mechanical hand to turn things to his advantage. When Darovit came to confront Bane, Zana blasted his hand to smithereens. For all her power and knowledge, Zana is still a blunt instrument, where Kenobi is a consummate master of the practical. He's understated. It all goes back to the quote from Mace Windu which summarized Kenobi's hidden brilliance. "That is so like you, Master Kenobi. I am called a great swordsman because I invented a lethal style. But who is greater, the creator of a killing form, or the master of the classic form?" Darth Zana is a Force specialist. She sort of keeps one foot in the corporeal world and one in the ethereal. Her Force abilities compensate for her shortcomings, but Kenobi's Force talents do not. He has no truly compromising weaknesses to speak of. To Zana, the Force is a crutch, something she relies on. To Kenobi, it is just one of the many instruments through which he exercises his cunning. And therein lies the difference between the two approaches. Zana uses the Force as a supplement to her overall technique. Kenobi uses it to complement his own. On the whole, Kenobi may not have as great a command of the Force, but he has oriented his focuses such that he is almost passively immune to the sorts of assaults Zana typically delivers. Kenobi would be virtually untouchable to Zana's spells of madness. Zana relies on the ability to plague her victims with visions of their greatest fears until they finally snap. Kenobi does not allow fear to guide him, and he simply doesn't have many deep inner demons to face at all. The same holds true of Mace Windu, who persevered through his own mission to Harun Kal. The experience was basically a torturous journey through the Jedi's own personal hell. Certain role-playing guides have outlined both of these particular masters as immune to psychic attacks in any case. So while Zana is undoubtedly the more potent and varied with the Force, she really only takes a very slight lead here solely because of her greater technical range and the potential use of her dark side tendrils. By the year 32 BBY, Mace Windu was one of 2 senior council members in the Jedi Order, the other, of course, being Grandmaster Yoda. Throughout numerous sources, Windu is commonly held in the highest esteem, said to be capable of pondering and interpreting matters of the Force with a clarity postulated to be second only to Master Yoda himself. The only active beings who rivaled him in this time were Yoda and Darth Sidious, both of whose strength in the Force eclipsed his own, Dooku, who was commonly considered Windu's equal in nearly every regard, and of course Anakin Skywalker, whose potential outstripped that of each and all. As previously mentioned, his telepathic abilities were highly advanced, as he, in addition to Kenobi, has been attributed with immunity to psychic attacks and interference. While not often employed by the Jedi Master, mind tricks were not foreign to him and well within the scope of his ability. In the novel Shatterpoint, he was portrayed as being capable of prompting subordinates, to whom he has forged a connection through the Force, into action via unspoken commands. He is capable of tracking individuals who carry objects he is bonded to, such as his lightsaber. He can also sense the presence and states of mind of others around him, strong in the Force or not, and determine if they are unconscious, injured, etc., with the exception of strong Force adepts who conceal these impressions from him. No matter the form of media, whether tinged with a more exaggerated flair or more grounded in interpretation, Windu is consistently portrayed with highly advanced telekinetic abilities, lifting objects weighing several tons with ease, augmenting punches and kicks and physical strikes, pulling off very difficult and elaborate acrobatics, even when injured. Mace at one point triggers a landslide in response to some distressed children, and exhibits some measure of control over it, stabilizing it to carry him over to the side of the precariously placed steam crawler the children were riding in. Windu has also displayed some talent with the healing arts, though the extent of his skill in this field is not well defined. Windu's signature gift was the rare Force ability known as the Shatterpoint. This power grants Windu and those rare Jedi like him a peculiar and acute insight following metaphorical fault lines perceived through the Force, allowing the Jedi to see points of vulnerability, importance, or curiosity. This applies in a direct sense in combat against opponents or the ability to literally shatter some seemingly unbreakable objects, but more interestingly, it also provides more metaphysical insights. Insights like those observed within the cause and effect of given actions, the weight of a decision, the meaning of or paths leading up to a specific event, the importance of an individual, or even where the person in question breaks. Darth Bane was a master of the dark side who managed to rise above the standard typically associated with the brutish Sith warrior archetype. Instinctively using his abilities in his youth, Bane became an excellent brawler, card player, and marksman, amongst other things due to the precognitive powers granted to him by his connection to the Force. Though he and even the investigative authorities had thought it a simple heart attack, Bane's own horrifically abusive father became the victim of the future Sith Lord's first murder. Bane unconsciously struck out with the Force one night after a savage beating from his father had left the young man badly injured and especially resentful. On the battlefield, Bane could become akin to a force of nature, even by the standards of other trained Force wielders. When enraged, he could effortlessly break through the Force shields of his opponents and throttle them to death, including the Sith Master, Cordis. On Tython, he ripped through the erected barriers and stasis fields employed against him by battle meditation-bolstered Jedi Masters, though admittedly he was equipped with his Orbalisk armor at the time, so this may be beyond the scope of his natural ability. His telekinetic abilities were very well developed, as he could unleash a raw blast so powerful that it devastated the Rakatan Temple, where he defeated his mentor, Kasim. He also telekinetically manipulated his lightsaber in combat on Ruusan. Bane showed a pronounced affinity for Force lightning after only one training session. He was also able to cleanse his body of toxins, provided he was able to identify the substance in time. having studied from the holocrons of such Sith as Frida Nad, Belia Darzu, Darth Endedu, and even Darth Revan, Bane was a very well-educated Sith. He devoured their teachings among those of others in order to have as much knowledge and as many abilities at his disposal as possible. He applied what he could, and those powers that were beyond his scope he attempted to counter through acquisition of superior knowledge. For example, he researched the effects of Sith magic in order to defend against Zana's mental spells, though he possessed no talent for the art himself. Despite his clear lack of affinity for sorcery, there were rituals that were well within the scope of his ability. For instance, he joined his power to the remainder of Khan's Brotherhood and unleashed a storm that caused widespread devastation across the forestry of Ruusan to drive out Lord Hoth and his army of light. Calling on the dark power that saturated the location, Bane also employed a death field against the cultists who safeguarded Endedu's keep on the world of Prekith, not to be confused with the ability employed by such Sith as Malak, Nihilus, or Traya. Contact with Bane's death field caused the victim to wither and die instantaneously, though the use of such a power would have instantly exhausted him had it not been for the sustaining power of the keep itself. Though he looked something like a caveman, Bane was actually quite intelligent. He was capable of using the Force in a more subtle fashion as well. He was strong enough to easily withstand mental suggestions, making him passively immune to the powers that afforded Khan his control over the rest of the Brotherhood. When he was unarmed and seeking an exit from the stone prison on Doan, he sensed Zana's arrival, and knowing his apprentice could perceive him through the Force, he left mental imprints of himself in false locations as he moved throughout the fortress, obscuring his trail, leading Zana along a goose chase, or wild bantha chase if you prefer. He was also skilled in the use of the beast trick, capable of quelling the rage of a Rancor and using it as a mount on the unknown world, and similarly dominated the mind of a Drexel and used it to fly across the minute gap in space that separated Onderon from its moon. He simultaneously mounted a force field of dark energy, allowing him to survive the brief trip through the vacuum of space. However, he accomplished the latter feat after his exposure to the Orbalisks, and it's possible, and probably even likely, that such a thing would be impossible for him to accomplish in his natural state. Finally, after taking the knowledge from Endedu's holocron, Bane learned of the ability to perform the Ritual of Essence Transfer. Though this could only successfully be used against a weak-willed subject, or at least a weaker mind than what was typically found amongst trained Force sensitives, let alone adepts such as Obi-Wan, Mace Windu, or even Zana for that matter. Darth Bane clearly applies his abilities in a more overtly destructive fashion than Mace Windu, and is most probably the stronger of the pair in terms of raw ability. But in terms of how they stack up against one another, they're still very evenly matched. There is likely a disparity between their level of strength in the Force, as Bane is arguably the stronger of the two. But how great is this disparity? To be honest, it's difficult to say. Darksiders typically display a greater variety and potency of combative ability. I'm not certain that the difference between Bane's strength in the Force and Windu's is so very different from the contest Windu faced with Palpatine in the Chancellor's office. While I would not argue with the notion that Palpatine is in fact stronger in the Force than Darth Bane, I don't think it can be by a very great margin, despite what those who, in my view, misinterpret not the theory but the practice of Bane's Rule of Two would argue. From what I can tell, Bane's rule simply preserved the same approximate level of strength, aka worthiness, amongst each of the 30 who made up his line. What he did was prevent the decay of his order with the rule. It's a dubious claim at best to maintain that Bane's rule instigated an enormous growth spurt in terms of force power with each successive apprentice. Very clearly, either Bane or Zana could have won their final battle, and this is the pattern I imagine repeated itself on down through the line. Indeed, even Palpatine was apprehensive to the point of becoming paranoid where his master Darth Plagueis was concerned. The level of strength between master and apprentice seems to be traditionally rather even from the beginning of the line to the end of it. I think it's fairly clear that given as strong as Darth Bane was, not even Palpatine, as he's portrayed in Revenge of the Sith anyway, as this guy may as well be an entirely different character, let alone any of his predecessors, could have realistically been exponentially stronger in the Force than Darth Bane. To my mind, with extremely rare exceptions, like members of the Skywalker lineage, let's say, the greatest of any given era can typically stand with the greatest Force wielders of any other. And then we consider that Mace is generally seen as Dooku's equal, and therefore, while not on Yoda's level, he's in the next tier down. And given what Dooku could accomplish after his fall to darkness, it's not too difficult to imagine what Windu might have also become. Bane packs a lot of raw power, and knowledge for that matter, but Mace is approximately 10 years older than Bane, and due to the fact that he was raised within the Jedi Order, he effectively has about 30 more combined years of training and experience, since Darth Bane did not join Khan's Brotherhood until he was in his mid-20s. And then let's factor in that Mace has about 3 years of experience fighting and applying his skills in a war. And then we have to consider that even Bane's most powerful observed Force push did not actually kill his target. While such a blow must have been painful to endure, Kas'im shielded himself from the impact using the Force. It was the rubble from the leveled temple that buried and broke Kas'im's body. Bane's death field ability is a power I don't imagine he's capable of using without drawing on a powerful external source of energy, at least not to the same degree as he did on Prakkith. He'd likely tire out even more quickly, and the radius of 10 meters would likely decrease drastically as well. They're pretty evenly matched as far as telekinetic and telepathic mastery goes, as well as their ability to bolster themselves either through rage or the healing arts, and the cleansing of toxins from the body. The only gifts they possess that provide benefits entirely alien to one another are Essence Transfer and Force Lightning in Bane's corner, and the Shatterpoint in Mace's. Bane is not going to attempt Essence Transfer unless absolutely necessary, as it destroys the caster's body, and failure to assume command of a subject's body results in death. Besides, I highly doubt that Mace would even be susceptible to that attack, even from someone on Bane's level, as Zana successfully repelled her master's last-ditch effort without any detailed knowledge of the technique. She only needed her sheer force of will. Due to Mace's practice of Vapad, lightning may serve Bane well as a distractive tool or a supplemental weapon used to keep the Jedi on his guard during lulls in the clashes of their blades, but nothing more, as the Jedi can redirect it. Ultimately, Mace's Shatterpoint gift is a more consistent boon than Bane's powers. This isn't to say that it's necessarily more useful or more potent than any of Bane's powers, but it does carry the greatest potential to affect the final outcome of this fight. However, that still does not make it a trump card that stacks the odds in Windu's favor. For these reasons, I must say that while the Sith Lord is likely stronger in the Force, I must consider Darth Bane and Mace Windu equals in terms of how effective they are at using the Force against one another. In order to provide a means of visualizing the way I imagine the tendencies of each of these fighters, I would like to draw a few comparisons between them and some characters from Avatar: The Last Airbender and its continuation, Legend of Korra. Obi-Wan Kenobi is like the airbending master Tenzin. He relies on evasion and agility, and fights in a defensive posture, always favoring peace to violence. His form is very passive, but it can turn deadly. While he can and will cut loose when he must, he's not exactly the strongest player in the game, and he can get in over his head, though he's normally quite reliable and knows what he's doing. Darth Zana is like water and bloodbending master Councilman Tarlok. When faced against overwhelming opponents with greater strength and variety on their side, she must use her practical and dueling-centric skills for defense. And just when things start to look very bleak and she's taken a thrashing, she unleashes the arcane, the ethereal and the mystical, retreating from the physical battle and attacking her victims internally and ruthlessly taking command of the situation from within. Mace Windu is like firebending master General Iroh, usually content to settle disputes with words, but when forced he will cut you down without hesitation. When faced with an expression of pure hatred and inner imbalance, his response is to allow the energy to flow through him without touching him and to fountain it back out again, turning an enjoyment of a fight and the lure of the dark side into an expression of brightest light. And of course, Darth Bane is Fire Lord Ozai. Brutal, uncompromising, cruel, and devastating, more overwhelming than he is truly accurate. The Force is the conduit through which he wishes to destroy and rebuild the Sith Order and the galaxy at large. His powers are augmented by and emblematic of his own inner fire and desire to destroy anyone and anything that dares to stand in his way. And so at last we finally come to it. We've reached the verdict. In the end, it comes down to this. The Sith are generally more advanced Force wielders. Zana's abilities outstrip Obi-Wan in terms of scope, and Bane is definitely more overtly destructive than Mace Windu and packs a lot of raw power. But where Zana is tactically predictable, Obi-Wan is the opposite. He is more varied in terms of his approach as well, given that he himself has a respectable measure of raw power and can apply his abilities to suit an array of tactically different circumstances. Zana has really only prepared herself for a select few things: staunch defense, stealth and concealment, and attacking the mind. Obi-Wan is adept with the first two as well, and is a more refined, well-developed swordsman, and is likely immune to the kind of telepathic assault Zana can deliver. Ultimately, Obi-Wan Kenobi can take anything Darth Zana can throw at him, with the exception being her tendrils of negative energy, which I think she'd only be able to use by some fluke in any case. On the off chance Zana opens enough distance or subdues Kenobi long enough to unleash one of her spells of madness, it's not going to take Kenobi down for long for reasons already stated. He just doesn't have any inner demons to manipulate. Kenobi is resilient. The assault may not bounce right off him, but it's not going to subdue him for long. He's pretty much the quintessential Jedi. The same holds true should she try to attack Master Windu. Windu learned on Harun Kal that the dark side feeds on fear, and that a Jedi must control his or her own fear to combat it. He's come to terms with the most disturbing and troubling event of his life, and so, like Bane, has moved past caring whatever phantoms Zana can conjure. At best, Kenobi outmatches Zana as a duelist and disarms her, leaving her prone to a killing blow. At worst, they reach a draw and await the outcome of Windu and Bane's duel. So here goes. Darth Bane is the more talented Force wielder, at least in terms of combative applications, but Windu is the superior swordsman, and his mastery of Vapad grants him endurance essentially for as long as his dark opponent is still able to fight. And his Shatterpoint ability makes him precise and more apt to exploit a weakness the moment one is presented to him. Were it not for Mace's ability to nullify the effectiveness of some of Bane's powers through Vapad, I would say Bane would be the winner after a long and hard-fought battle. But in the end, Mace is a greater master of the lightsaber and is similarly strong with the Force. It's just that he's turned his focus inward to regulate his emotions and perceptions, rather than extended it outward to shape the world around him, in the way of Sith like Bane and Zana. All Kenobi has to do is keep the pressure up on Zana and wait for Windu to dispatch Bane. If he can do that, and avoid Bane's lightning and telekinetic attacks in the process, then this will become a countdown until death for the Dark Lord of the Sith at the hands of an exhausted Mace Windu, which in turn would leave Zana outnumbered and woefully outmatched. Under such circumstances, neither her practice of Form 3 nor the fluke possibility of her employing her dark side tendrils is likely to grant her enough time to take out both of the Jedi before one of them delivers a killing blow. And so I conclude that the Jedi Masters take this fight however narrowly. No matter what, the survivors of this battle are going to be absolutely exhausted and gravely injured, In fairness, I think it's safe to say that one of the Jedi could very well be forced to endure a fatal wound that would require immediate medical attention or lead them to die soon after accomplishing their goal, a la Darth Vader in Return of the Jedi. But they had accomplished their goal nonetheless. I proclaim Mace Windu and Obi-Wan Kenobi the winners. Oh man, I do apologize for the extreme delay, my friends. Long story short, 2.5 months of my time was taken up during an intense hiring process for a job I ultimately did not get. It was an opportunity that fell into my lap. I didn't have very much time to prepare, and it just took hold of my life. So I apologize for that. So that was 2.5 months. The rest of the time has been spent battling serious technical issues with my PC. And that just hasn't been easy to fight through. But I finally got that. I am so grateful to any and all of you who have had the patience to wait around and stick by me and to see this project, which I've been working on for like 3 years now, finally come out. So I hope you appreciate it. Of course, if you have any, comments or objections to anything I said or did in the video, please go ahead and keep that information confined to civil comments in the space provided below. As my long delay should show you, life is busy enough for all of us without descending into petty little squabbles online. So please, even if you are a child, don't act like it. Thank you for your time and your patience and your solidarity. I will see you guys on the next video, which hopefully will come out soon. I appreciate you all for watching this. Thanks again. Signing off.